In Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41, we observe Jesus asleep in a boat while a storm was occurring. Normally, a storm would keep us awake. Normally, the fear that would produce would keep us from being able to fall asleep. But Jesus shows us that it's possible to sleep in a storm. Not just a literal one of nature, but the storms of life that come upon us, whether it be a pandemic or whether it be civil unrest. Is it possible to sleep during such circumstances? Following the example of Jesus, yes it is. Let's read together the text and learn 3 lessons from it. Mark chapter 4, beginning at verse 35. On that day when evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" One of the first things we learn from this account is that Jesus' power over nature gives weight to his words, gives authority to what he taught. In fact, chapter 4 of Mark began with a day of Jesus teaching the multitudes. In a boat on the edge of the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he taught them. And now Mark includes this account about him being able to miraculously control the winds to teach this very important lesson. If Jesus has power to control nature, then he has the authority to tell me what to do. I need to listen to his teaching. I need to pay close attention to it, because he has the power not only to control the winds and the waves, but to raise people from the dead and do anything that needs to be done. But a second lesson we learn from this account is that Jesus was not only the Son of God, he was also fully human. He needed sleep. He had been teaching all day, and now in the boat he has fallen asleep. A demonstration of his humanity, just like ours. The way the Hebrew writer writes in Hebrews chapter 2, beginning at verse 14, speaking of Jesus Christ, "Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is the devil, and might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives." Verse 17, "Therefore he had to be made like his brethren in all things, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For since he himself was tempted in that which he has suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted." What a wonderful thing to be reminded that Jesus was not only the Son of God, but also human, just like you and me. And so the next time we're tempted to make excuses for our sin, let's remember Jesus. He was tempted in all the ways we are, yet he resisted and never did sin, showing us that we can do the same. And the next time we're tempted to think that Jesus doesn't understand my problems, he doesn't understand my pain, he doesn't understand my fatigue, remember, he knew pain, he knew fatigue. He was human just like we are. But mostly we learn from this lesson that there is peace in faith. The reason why Jesus could sleep peacefully is because he knew his Father in heaven had command of the winds and the sea. And he links the idea of the disciples' lack of faith with their fear. They could have been able to sleep with Jesus had they had the same faith. Eventually the disciples did learn. They observed their master throughout the time that he was here. And Peter, for example, when he found himself in a particular storm of his life later on in Acts chapter 12, where Herod had put him into prison and was getting ready to take him out so as to persecute him and perhaps even behead him the way he had done James in the earlier verses of the chapter, we find Peter And what do you suppose he's doing there in the prison cell? Acts chapter 12 and verse 6. On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison, but he is asleep, just like his master in the storm on the Sea of Galilee. And the truth is, all the faithful can sleep this way in the storms of life, whether it be pandemics or civil unrest, because they know that their Father in heaven does not sleep even while they are. Listen to the psalmist in Psalm 121, verses 1 through 4. Psalm 121, beginning at verse 1. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. And that includes the Israel of God that Paul describes in the book of Galatians as being the church of today. And so we need to have this faith and not be like the disciples who were frantic and thought that Jesus was going to allow them to perish because of their lack of faith at that time. Do you sleep well, brother or friend, in these times that we live in even now? Jesus offers you good rest. Matthew 11:28, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And you know what? These words have weight, coming as they do from someone who could sleep through a storm. Do you need to become a Christian today? If so, and if you do it, you will sleep much better tonight.